Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today we find ourselves as unique battle mages who each specialize in their own magical discipline. You'll tailor your deck to your strategic tastes and in reaction to emerging opportunities while trying to curse and counter-curse your opponents into submission. Behext is a magical combat deck building game for 3 to 5 players. It takes 15 minutes per player to play, is for ages 14 and up, and published by Smirk Dagger Games. Now today we'll be doing a rule school where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now I've placed timestamps below me in the description of this video just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Now this game is on Kickstarter right now. That link is below me and that will take you directly to the project page. Let's get started. Behext is a magical combat deck building game for 3 to 5 players, where you'll be a battle mage who each specializes in their own magical discipline. Players will be casting different spells. Sometimes you'll just be deflecting them, like to the player that sits across from you and giving it to them. Or you might be enhancing it like a boost that does +1 damage and you'll be passing it to your left or right. Some players might disrupt the spell, causing the caster to rethink their strategy. And if someone's not able to deflect that spell, the caster will gain willpower, which is essentially points, and the person that it detonated on will lose willpower. Players will be conjuring new spells, some of them coming out right away with some ongoing abilities. Other cards are tempting because they're worth points at the end of the game, but they're dangerous because if a spell detonates on you, you'll lose 2 additional willpower, for example. So let's see if you're able to build your deck and deflect and enhance spells, so at the end of the game, you end up with the most points. To set up, each of the players is going to select one of the 6 battle mages to be their own. Now each of these have different styles of play. For example, the silencer, interfere, negate, control in the battle through the denial. And on page 3 of the rulebook, it actually gives even more detail as the differences between the battle mages. Now you can also randomly assign the battle mages if you feel better with that as well. Now once you have your battle mage selected, you'll take that player mat in front of you. You'll notice number 5 has a slightly different color. You will take the willpower token and place it right on 5. Next, you're going to get together your own battle mage deck. Now all players will have 7 of the same core cards. And on the bottom right of these cards, they say core, so you'll easily be able to find them. Each player is going to get 2 turn aside right, 2 turn aside left, 2 deflect across, and 1 draw fire. And again, they all say core. Each player, regardless of your battle mage, will get all 7 of those cards. You'll also get 3 cards that are specific to your battle mage, looking at the picture in the bottom right. So you're going to take your 10 card deck, you're going to shuffle all these cards together, and you'll place it face down just to the left of your playmat where it says draw deck. For any battle mages not being played that game, you can remove their 3 cards from the game. You won't be using them. You also won't be using any additional core cards than the 7 that go to each battle mage. Meaning if you're playing with less than the full complement of players, there'll be some core cards that you'll also remove from the game. Next, off to the side, place all the hex and enhancement tokens separated by type, and also place the round tracker on the initiates circle side, so it looks like this, and put the marker on round 1. Next, you're going to shuffle up all the main deck. Now you know it's the main deck because the cards themselves in the bottom right have a cost. They don't have a battle mage's face and it doesn't say core. You'll shuffle all these together, you'll split up into 4 piles. Roughly there'll be about 25 cards each, but they don't have to be perfect. You'll put them face down, but the top card you will flip face up of each deck. You'll then read these cards to everyone so they're familiar with what they do. Then choose a player to be the first caster, and they will take the first caster token and give them a hex token. And those tokens say Behext on one side and it has this icon on the other. It doesn't matter which side you have up. The object of the game is to have the most points in the end, and you'll be gaining points by wherever your willpower is. For here, it's exactly 5 points. You'll also be adding points on the lower left of any of the spells that you've gotten throughout the game. It doesn't matter where they are in your draw deck or your discard pile. You add all these all up, but you have to be careful because the spells worth victory points are potentially dangerous to play. The game is played over 4 rounds. The round starts with the first caster, but turns are going to be ping-ponging around from player to player as they sling spells with hexes until a player can no longer defend themselves and becomes behexed. Each round will go through 5 phases. First, we start with the ready phase. Now in the ready phase, all players are going to draw a hand of 5 cards from their deck into their hands. Now when drawing cards, you might draw a green card, which is a charm. Charms have this arrow down, which means you need to play it immediately, and when doing so, you play it face up next to your standing effects section of your playmat. Now in this case, it says draw 2 cards, so you do that, but it also has some other things that we'll go over later. These are sort of effects that will happen for the entire round. Now after players have had a moment to look through their hand, the first caster will choose any opponent and place the hex token in front of them. Now no card needs to be played now, just at the beginning here, they'll place that Behext token right in front of them. They pick anyone, let's say they pick the Silencer on the other side of the table. Now the player with this hex token is the intended target, and that verbiage will be important on some of the language in the cards. Now normally your cards are secret to other players that are in your hand, but I placed them down on the table just so you could see them. So that intended target, it is now their turn. Now they first are given the opportunity to conjure a new spell, and you do so using the conjuring numbers here. This is essentially a currency that allows you to then gain a new spell. Now looking at the 4 different decks, on the bottom right of each of these it has a cost, 2, 2, 1, and 4 for example. So that's the cost that they need to spend in order to get one of those spells. So for example, let's say they wanted this boost. It's a cost of 1. Now to do that, they would discard a card or cards from their hand that give them enough conjuring power in order to get that spell. In this case, we only need 1, so they could just discard this card. It goes face up onto their discard pile, which is right there. Then they would be able to get this spell. Now this goes directly into your hand. It doesn't go to your discard pile like standard deck builders. So they'd add it right to their hand that they could use immediately. Now when discarding a card when conjuring, you cannot use any card in this phase that has these chains on it. These are binding conjure, and they're only used towards the end of the round and a phase later, the gathering phase that we'll go over. So when you're conjuring, when it's your turn, you cannot use any card with the chains as power to conjure. Now let's say this was a conjuring power of 2, they would have overspent. It doesn't matter, you don't get any change back. Then the card would get flipped up and it would get red so everyone knows what the new card can do. Also keep in mind, if you ever conjure and get a spell that is a green charm, you must play it face up on your standing effects immediately. Now there's another way we could have gotten that spell. You could discard a card. This one is 0. Anytime you discard at least 1 card, you can spend 1 willpower to get 1 level of conjuring power. So we could lose a willpower, which essentially is points, and that gave us 1. Now you can only do that once. You can't go down as many times as you want. Just you have to at least discard a card and go down 1 there. And that now we had 0 plus 1, so we have 1. We had enough to buy that boost card. Now remember, conjuring a spell is optional. You don't have to do it, but if you do it, you have to do it right away, right when you're given the hex token. And speaking of some conjuring etiquette, you shouldn't wait till your turn to consider whether you'll be conjuring and or which card you'll want to purchase. You should know which cards are out there, and when a new one comes out, just add that little bit of information. That will help speed the game up quite a bit. Now, whether or not you decided to conjure, which was optional, you now must play a deflection or an enhanced deflection card, even if it's one you just got from your hand to pass the hex to someone else, and you have to play one if you legally can. For example, if they played this one that says turn aside right, this shows you a logo of passing it to the right. You would then play that card to your discard pile, and you would pass the hex token to the player to your right. Here would pass the player to your left. This passes it directly across from you. Now, if you're playing with 3 players, passing across means you pass it to a player of your choice. Now, if you're playing with 4 players, it's obviously the person directly across from you. If you're playing with 5 players, it's any player of your choice who's not seated directly and immediately to your left or right. But let's say instead of playing one of the standard deflection cards, which are blue, we play the boost. This was the spell that we just conjured. Now this allows us to pass it to the player to the left or to the right, and we get to add a +1 damage to it with the boost. So if you remember, there were enhancements placed here at the beginning of the game. We will grab boost, and you would add that to the hex tile. Now, these types of enhancements, they can stack and they're cumulative. And now you're gonna pass this to, again, by the boost card said, to our left or right. Now I wanna point out that this boost card, it's gonna get us a point at the end of the game. However, it's a little dangerous because this is boosting that. It's gonna be +1 damage, but we're making the spell more powerful, and there's a good chance it might come back to us again, so it's dangerous to go for these powerful cards that have points, because you might end up hurting yourself with them in the end. So let's say that Silencer passes it to the left, because they could have passed it to the left or the right per the boost card, and now it's this player's turn. They can optionally conjure if they want to, as shown earlier, and then they need to play a card to deflect it to someone else. Now this flow continues until the intended player either has no cards in hand or has no cards that may legally be played, and when this occurs, you go to the Behext phase. So in the Behext phase, the hex essentially detonates and the player who couldn't pass it away becomes Behexed. Now by default, the player who is Behexed loses 1 willpower, and the hexer, which is the last player to pass the spell before it detonates, would gain a willpower. However, that's by default, and these can change depending on various spells and effects, like this one was boosted. If you remember, it was +1 damage, so this one would lose another willpower, but the hexer does not increase their willpower above the standard amount of 1 unless otherwise stated in the text of the spell. However, if you are the one that's Behexed, and you hold a red Behext card, you must play one of them. Even if you had more than one, you must play one of them and resolve it. So for this sense, lose 2 additional willpower when you're Behexed. Now, again, this is bad. Why would someone have this card? Well, because it's worth points in the end. It's tempting to get the points, but it could hurt you in the end. So if they had that, they would have had to play it to the discard pile and they would have lost 2 more willpower. At this point, if there's any player or players who have not been Behexed and has played 1 or fewer deflection cards, whether they're the standard blue or the enhanced purple ones, if they've played 1 or fewer, then they are going to gain 2 willpower. Now, so you're going to be wanting to make sure you pass those hexes around, let them ping pong to different players to ensure that they have to play enough cards so that they don't get that 2 willpower. Next, you're going to go to the gathering phase and you'll move the round marker up to the next round. Then, starting with the first caster who still has that in front of them from the beginning of the round, they have 1 opportunity to conjure 1 spell. Again, this is optional. Now to do so, you'll look at all the cards you still have left in your hand and you'll add those up. Now this is the phase where you can use the Chained Binding Conjure. So you're going to use all the ones in your hand, and if you have any green charms out in your standing effects section, remember those always have change on them too, this is when you can use those. So if we had this, we would have 3, 6, 7, 8 to spend. Remember, this is optional and you can only conjure 1 spell. So if we wanted this one, it would cost 4, we wouldn't get any change back. Now just like when you possibly conjured earlier in the round, during this gathering phase, you can still spend 1 willpower, and only 1, to gain 1 conjure power. Now when you're doing this, you can only do it if you still are spending 1 card at least to get conjure power. You would then take the spell that you're conjuring and place it on top of your draw pile. That means you're definitely going to have it next round. Then you'll flip that card, which was the top of the deck for this pile, and read it to everyone. Then you do the same thing in clockwise order for each player. Once all players have had 1 chance to conjure a single spell, we then go to the cleanup phase. First, you're going to remove all hex tokens and any attached enhancements to them, and place them back into the supply. Then players are going to take any charms, any cards that they played that round, and any cards that were in their hand that they used to conjure a spell, and they're all going to go to their discard pile. Meaning that at the end of the round, you'll always have 0 cards by default. You'll then move the first caster to the next player clockwise. You'll then give a hex token to that new first caster. You're then going to burn the top card of each of the little spell decks here, and burning means removing them from the game. And then you reveal the next card of each of the decks, reading them to everyone so they know what they do. Then you'll start the new round at the beginning of the ready phase, as we already have gone through. Now there's one type of card I haven't talked about yet, and these are disruptions. And they're yellow and it has this icon on them, and these cards may be played when it's not even your turn. Now these help you cancel or alter other spell cards as they're played, or sometimes to interrupt a turn to disrupt an effect before a player takes an action. For example, if someone played a deflect and they say, hey, it's going to go to this player to my left, and that's us, we can immediately then play that card to cancel the last card played, and then they play another card from their hand instead. Now again, these are played right after the caster names a target, but if any time more than one player wants to act at the same time with one of these types of cards, start with the first caster and proceed in order clockwise around the table. Now at the beginning of the gathering phase, if you're in round 4 and you move this to this spot here, you do not do the rest of the gathering phase, you just go to the end game scoring. And you'd add up your willpower, which are points, and all the points on all your cards, remembering some of those points might actually be negative, and whoever has the most points at the end is the winner. If it's tied, the player with the highest willpower will win. If they're still tied, the deck with the highest total conjuring costs of all the cards is going to be the winner. And if it's still tied, the player that has the least amount of core cards. Once you're familiar with the game, you can begin adding different mastery packs. There's 4 circles of mastery, and you'll open them at certain recommended times. The first one you'll open after playing your second game. The second circle, all players should be familiar with the game and should start recognizing a few cards by sight. The third circle should be open a game or 2 after unlocking the second circle. And the last one, all players should be able to sight identify many of the spells in order to manage this circle. Now each of these reveal a new battle mage, additional spell cards, and new mechanics. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into Behext faster than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now if you have further questions about the rules, I've placed a link below me in the description of this video, and that's the best place to ask them since I'll be notified, but so will Smirk Dagger Games. And remember, this game's on Kickstarter right now. I've placed that project link in the description below. Now you can click that, check out the project, see all the different reward levels, pledge levels, and all the final art and components.